For 3 years, Alessandro De Luca had lived in a world of complete silence. The explosion at a New York restaurant hadn't only taken the younger brother of the city's most feared mafia boss, it had taken his hearing forever. At least 4 of the finest specialists on the East Coast had signed the same conclusion. Then, on a Friday morning, Emma, the 4-year-old daughter of a housemaid, ran up to him, tugged at his sleeve, and used her tiny hands to sign, clumsily, that there was something inside his ear. Alessandro thought it was only the innocent words of a child. But minutes later, Emma opened her small palm and placed on his desk something she had happened to see inside his private doctor's room. Alessandro looked at it and froze, because the object resting in that tiny hand could prove that for 3 years, the man all of New York feared had been deceived by the very people closest to him. If you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Stories like this one, stories about silence, betrayal, and the smallest hands uncovering the biggest truths drop here every single week. Give this video a like if what you've just heard has already pulled you in, because the deeper we go, the harder it will be to look away, and share this video with someone who would want to sit through every minute of it beside you. Now, let's go back to that Friday morning, to the quiet minutes before a 4-year-old girl walked into a room full of grown men and handed the most feared boss in New York the truth he had missed for 3 years. At 6:40 in the morning, the water in the east pool of the De Luca estate on Oyster Bay lay as smooth as a sheet of glass no one had touched. Alessandro De Luca had already swum 22 laps. He swam every morning, always at that hour, always alone, and always with no one permitted within his line of sight, unless there was business to attend to. Underwater, everyone was deaf. That was the only reason he still kept this habit. Down there, he wasn't a man missing something everyone else possessed. Down there, the silence belonged to him, not to the 4 specialists who had signed it over to him 3 years ago. Down there, he was simply a man moving through water. He turned once more at the shallow end, pushed off, and let the length of the pool carry him back toward the marble steps. When he climbed out, the cold morning air met his shoulders. He reached for the towel folded on the iron chair, draped it around his neck, and walked into the corridor with his hair still wet, water tracing a thin line behind him along the polished stone. Marco Bellini was waiting at the end of the corridor. Marco was 50 years old and had served the De Luca family for more than 10 of those years. He had learned, better than anyone else in the house, that the most valuable thing in the mornings was brevity. He carried a small whiteboard and a black marker in his left hand, the way another man might carry a coffee cup, and he had done so every morning for 3 years without missing a day. He wrote quickly in clean, block letters, then turned the board around. Dr. Hale arriving at 7. Miss Rossi joining for breakfast this morning. Alessandro read the 2 lines. He nodded once. Marco wiped the board clean with the edge of his palm. Alessandro walked past him toward the staircase, leaving damp footprints on the runner. He climbed to the 2nd floor without a sound, and no sound met him at the top. 14 people lived and worked inside this house, and for 3 years he had not heard a single word any of them said. He had learned to live inside their silence the way another man might learn to live inside a slow illness by pretending, one morning at a time, that this was simply how the world was arranged. In his dressing room, he pulled on a white shirt, then buttoned it slowly, one button at a time, because his hands sometimes still remembered rhythms his ears could no longer follow. On the low cabinet beside the window sat a single photograph in a plain silver frame. He glanced at it the way a man glances at something he has already memorized. 2 brothers standing side by side at a baseball game 4 years earlier, the older one with a hand on the younger one's shoulder, both of them laughing at something someone off camera had just said. Matteo had been 32 that summer. Alessandro no longer remembered what the joke had been. He straightened his collar, checked his cuffs, and turned toward the door. Behind the main house, past the low hedge and the narrow gravel path that curved through the garden, stood the staff quarters. It was a plain 3-story building the color of pale stone, older than the estate around it, small enough that a man walking briskly could pass from one end to the other in under a minute. 14 people lived on that side of the garden. Only 2 of them shared a room. Sophia Carter was 28 years old. She had come to the De Luca estate 2 years earlier through a small placement office in Queens that asked few questions and expected fewer answers. Her husband had walked out the week after Emma turned 6 months old, and there had been no one else, no parents living, no siblings she still spoke to, no aunt willing to keep a crying infant while a young mother looked for work. So Sophia had folded her life into 2 suitcases and taken the first live-in position the office offered her. The estate on Oyster Bay had said yes to the child. That had been enough. Emma was 4 years old that October. Her hair was brown and fine, and Sophia tied it into 2 small tails each morning before breakfast. She carried a cloth rabbit wherever she went, a soft gray thing with one ear that had come loose and been sewn back on with green thread, because green had been the only color of embroidery floss Sophia could find in the drawer that night. Emma had insisted the mending stay visible. She said the stitches made the rabbit brave. At night, after Emma fell asleep, Sophia sat under the small lamp on the writing desk and opened one of 2 books she had bought from the public library 6 weeks earlier. Both were introductions to American Sign Language. She had renewed them twice already. The pages were dog-eared, and she moved a pencil slowly under each line the way she had done in school as a girl. She had taught Emma a handful of signs so far. Thank you, uncle, hungry, mama, sleepy. Emma practiced them on the rabbit before she practiced them on anyone else, and she was proud of every one. The child was curious about the tall man who lived in the main house. She had noticed, in the way small children notice everything, that he never answered when she called out a greeting. She had asked her mother why once, and Sophia had knelt in front of her and explained, gently, that Mr. DeLuca could not hear. Emma had thought about this for a long time. Then she had asked if that meant he was lonely. Sophia had not known how to answer. The Tuesday of the week before, Emma had spent an entire morning with her crayons at the low table in the servants' pantry. When she was finished, she carried the paper across the garden with both hands. On it was a tall man standing beside a rectangle of blue water, a yellow sun with careful spokes hanging above his head. She had left the drawing on the corner of Alessandro's desk while he was outside. He had come back that afternoon and stopped in front of it. He had stood there a long time. He had said nothing. The drawing was still on the desk a week later, untouched, in exactly the place she had put it. Inside the main house, 14 adults had learned, one at a time, the same set of small habits. They lowered their eyes when Alessandro passed. They bowed their heads at a slight angle, murmured something no one required them to say, and moved on quickly. The oldest housekeeper, a woman who had worked for the DeLuca family for 19 years, no longer spoke to him at all. When she needed to reach him about linens or menus, she wrote a note on a folded slip of paper and slid it under the door of his study. He always found it. She never asked whether he had. None of them looked at him for longer than the second it took to acknowledge that he had entered a room. Only Emma climbed the large leather armchair in the sitting room and sat down beside him as if it belonged to her. She had done it the first time on a Wednesday afternoon, and neither of them had known what to do about it. She still did it now, at least twice a week. She brought the rabbit with the green stitches, held it up in front of him, and waited until he looked. Then she raised 3 fingers in the small, wobbling sign she had learned for name. He had looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, because it had been years since he had spelled anything for a child, he raised his own right hand and shaped each letter one at a time. Rabbit. Emma had grinned. She had bounced once on the leather seat. Then she had lifted her own hand and taught him hers. Emma. He had done it correctly the first time. At first he had only tolerated her. Then, without deciding when it had happened, he had begun to notice something. Emma was the only person in the house who spoke directly to him. She did not send a housekeeper to interpret. She did not slow her mouth into an exaggerated shape, as though he were a stupid man in a foreign country. She simply moved her small hands and waited for him to answer. Vivian Rossi came down the wide staircase into the sitting room at 8:30 that Friday morning. She was 31 years old, the only daughter of Don Salvatore Rossi, who ran the largest Italian family in Brooklyn. Her engagement to Alessandro had been agreed on the year after the explosion. The wedding was 6 weeks away. Everyone who mattered in the boroughs had already been told, and half of them had already sent their gifts. The marriage was a strategic joining of 2 houses, and neither family pretended otherwise. What it required of Vivian, and what it required of Alessandro, had been written into a 9-page agreement long before either of them had chosen a florist. She smiled as she reached the bottom step. She was carrying a small silver tray with a porcelain cup of tea on it, and she carried it herself, as she always did, because she wanted him to see her bring it. She set the cup down beside him and spoke slowly, opening her mouth a little too wide. "I had them make it just the way you like it," he nodded once. He watched her lips and gave her the small, practiced smile that had come to serve as his answer to almost everything she said. In 3 years, she had never learned a single sign. He had long since folded that fact away with the others that could not be changed. Dr. Victor Hale arrived at the estate at 7 o'clock that morning, exactly the way he had arrived on every Friday for the past 3 years. He was 64 years old. His hair, once black, had gone entirely white, and he combed it back the same way each morning, so precisely that the line of the part never moved from one week to the next. He wore a gray three-piece suit, the middle button of the vest always fastened, the watch chain always tucked into the small pocket he never used for anything else. He looked, when he stepped out of his car, exactly the way a man was supposed to look who had spent 20 years being trusted by one of the most dangerous families in New York. Victor had served the DeLuca family since the days of Alessandro's father. He had signed the papers when the old man died. He had sat by Alessandro's bed for the first 3 days after the explosion in Little Italy, when no one else in the family knew whether the surviving son would open his eyes or not. He had authorized the transfer to the private facility in Westchester. He had read the diagnosis aloud to the family, one hand resting on the folder, his voice steady and careful. Permanent hearing loss. Nothing further could be done. He had been the last steady thing in the darkest weeks of Alessandro's life, and Alessandro had never forgotten it. Victor's black leather case always held 3 things: a blood pressure monitor, a file with a blue cover, and a small amber bottle, no larger than a thumb, with a printed label that read Maintenance Anti-Inflammatory Therapy for Chronic Auricular Administration. The weekly ritual took place in the small study on the ground floor, the one with the tall window that faced the garden. Alessandro sat in the leather armchair, sleeves rolled twice at the cuff. Victor set his case on the low table, unfastened the 2 brass locks, and began the same sequence he had performed almost 150 times before. He wrapped the cuff around Alessandro's left arm. He watched the small dial climb, then fall. He wrote the reading into the blue file in his careful, slanted hand. He closed the cuff, coiled the tubing, and put it back inside the case. Then he took out the amber bottle. He unscrewed the black plastic cap and set it on the table beside him. He placed one hand, gently, against the side of Alessandro's head and tilted it slowly to the right. He held the small dropper above the left ear and released 3 drops, one after another, counting under his breath the way he had counted for 3 years. Alessandro closed his eyes as the cold liquid slid into the canal. He always closed his eyes for this part. He had never questioned it. Victor was the man who had sat with him through the worst nights of his life. A man did not doubt the person who had refused to leave the room when everyone else had. What Alessandro did not notice, and had never noticed, was a small habit Victor had developed somewhere along the way. As he replaced the dropper and screwed the cap back onto the amber bottle, his right thumb moved, once, twice, 3 times, against the knuckle of his index finger, in a slow, unconscious rhythm. That Friday, at 7:15 in the morning, Emma was playing hide-and-seek with no one. Her mother had already gone into the main kitchen to help with breakfast. The other maids were upstairs turning down beds. Emma had eaten her toast, kissed the rabbit's mended ear for luck, and slipped through the connecting door into the back of the main house because the game was more interesting there. She was counting to 20 under her breath and looking for a hiding place no one had ever found her in before. She ran along the east corridor of the ground floor on the balls of her small feet, the way she always ran when she wanted to be quiet. Halfway down the hall, past the sitting room and the narrow bathroom no one used, she saw it. A tall wooden bookcase stood flush against the wall beside the door to Staff Room 3. The small back office kept ready for medical staff whenever the family required them. The gap between the bookcase and the doorframe was just wide enough for a 4-year-old to press herself into. She squeezed in sideways, hugging the rabbit against her chest. The door to Staff Room 3 was open about 3 centimeters. From where she stood, she could see a thin, bright vertical line of the room inside a corner of the small table, the edge of the porcelain sink, the pale wallpaper. She heard footsteps coming up the corridor. She held her breath. Dr. Hale walked past the bookcase without turning his head. He did not see her. He stepped into Staff Room 3 and pulled the door closed behind him, but he did not turn the lock. The door settled back into place with the same 3-centimeter gap it had had before. Emma pressed one eye against the space. Victor set his black leather case down on the small table. He clicked the 2 brass locks open with his thumbs and lifted the lid. He reached inside and took out the familiar amber bottle, the one Emma had already seen him carry into the sitting room 3 times before. He walked to the little porcelain sink in the corner. He unscrewed the black cap. He held the bottle over the drain and tipped it, carefully, until roughly half of the amber liquid had poured out. It swirled down into the sink, dark and slow, and disappeared. Emma watched it go. Then Victor reached inside his suit jacket, into a small pocket sewn on the inner lining that Emma had not known existed. He drew out a second bottle. This one was smaller, unlabeled, and the liquid inside it caught the light differently. It was clearer, and it carried a faint, pale green tint, like pool water on a rainy afternoon. He unscrewed that cap too. He tipped the second bottle carefully over the mouth of the amber one and refilled it, right up to the line where the first liquid had been. He replaced the black cap on the amber bottle and screwed it down. He shook the bottle 3 times, gently, the way a chef seasons something he does not want to bruise. Before he began, and again after he finished, Victor lifted his head and looked slowly around the room. His eyes swept the door, the window, the corners. He did not notice the 3-centimeter gap. Emma did not understand what she was watching, but she memorized every part of it, the way she always memorized the rules of a new game. Victor Hale stepped out of staff room 3 with his black leather case in his right hand, the amber bottle now sitting quietly inside it, and turned in the direction of the small sitting room on the ground floor. He walked at exactly the pace he always walked, unhurried, the way a man walks who has done the same thing every Friday for 3 years. Emma pressed herself deeper into the space behind the tall bookcase. She held the rabbit tight against her chest. She counted his footsteps as they moved down the corridor and away from her, the way her mother had taught her to count when she was scared of thunder. She counted to 22 before the sound of them faded into the far end of the hall. Then she slipped out from behind the bookcase, straightened her small dress, and ran on soft feet in the same direction. She stopped at the wide archway of the main sitting room and looked in. Alessandro was already there. He was seated in the leather armchair by the tall window, his sleeves rolled twice at the cuff, waiting the way he waited every Friday. Victor was just stepping through the far door into the smaller connected study, the one with the low table where the case always went. He pushed the door halfway closed behind him. Emma crossed the sitting room without a sound. She stopped at the half-closed door and leaned close to the narrow gap. Through it, she saw Victor set the case on the low table. She saw him lift out the amber bottle. She saw him unscrew the black cap and lay it on the wood beside him. She saw him place one hand, gently, against the side of Alessandro's head and tilt it slowly to the right. She saw 3 small drops fall, one after another, into the left ear. Alessandro's eyes were closed. He did not move. He did not know. When it was finished, Victor screwed the cap back onto the amber bottle, wrote something into the blue file, closed his case, and let himself out through the side door that led to the drive. She heard his footsteps grow small on the gravel. Alessandro opened his eyes. He drew in a slow breath, the way a man does when he is preparing to stand. Then he stood. Emma pushed the door the rest of the way open with her small palm and stepped inside. He looked down. He was surprised to see her there. He did not move. She reached up and tugged, once, at the cuff of his sleeve. She had rehearsed nothing. She was 4 years old and she did not have the words she needed, in any language, so she used the ones she had. She raised 2 fingers to her lips and moved them in the small, private sign she had made up herself for the doctor. Then she held out both her small hands, palms up, as if she were holding 2 invisible bottles, and she crossed them slowly through the air, one over the other, once, and again, and then, very deliberately, she pointed at his left ear. Alessandro went perfectly still. Something cold slid down between his shoulder blades, and he did not know why. But his reason arrived a second later, the way reason always did. She was 4. A child of 4 could see many things and not understand any of them. He softened his face. He smiled at her, very faintly. He reached down and rested his hand on the top of her head, once, briefly. Then, he let her go. For the next 3 hours, Alessandro tried to work. He read the same page of a contract twice and could not have said afterward what the page was about. He signed nothing. He turned the small motion Emma had made over and over in his mind, the way a man turns a stone in his palm. 2 invisible bottles, one passing over the other. Then a small finger pointing at his left ear. A child of 4 could see a great deal without understanding any of it. That was still true. But something else was true too, and it kept climbing back up through the reasoning he had built to dismiss her. A child could be wrong about meaning. A child could not invent a motion that specific. Just before 11, he sent for her. Sophia brought Emma up to the second-floor study and left, when he nodded once at the door. Emma stepped in with the rabbit under her arm and stopped at the edge of the rug, uncertain. Alessandro did something he had not done for anyone in 3 years. He set aside the small whiteboard on his desk, walked around it, and lowered himself onto one knee in front of her, so that his eyes were level with hers. Emma looked back at him, solemn and curious. He signed slowly, one word at a time, and wrote the same words in block letters on the whiteboard for the pieces she did not know. Where did you see it? Emma took his hand. She took his hand as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world, and led him out of the room, down the wide staircase, along the east corridor of the ground floor. She stopped in front of the tall wooden bookcase and staff room 3. Show me where you hid. She pointed at the narrow gap between the bookcase and the doorframe. Then she squeezed her small body into it and looked out at him, exactly the way she had looked out at Victor 3 hours earlier. Alessandro measured the angle with his eyes. From inside that gap, she had seen the sink, the corner of the small table, and about a third of the room. What colors were the 2 bottles? She stepped out and pointed at the low table. Victor had left the amber bottle behind there earlier, tucked back inside the case. But she remembered where it had sat. Like that one, she signed, choosing the sign for same. Then she paused, thinking, and her small hands worked hard to describe the other one. Clearer, paler, green, but only a little, like the pool water when it rains. Did the doctor look around the room? She nodded firmly. Then she rolled her eyes, deliberately, one full sweep left and right, and again, twice. The way an adult in a hurry checks a room before doing something they do not want to be seen doing. Where did he get the second bottle? She patted her own small chest, high up on the left side, over the place where a man's inner suit pocket would sit. Alessandro remained on one knee. The cold that had touched him 3 hours earlier came back and stayed. He placed one hand on her shoulder. He signed slowly, and every letter carried more weight than any word he had put on paper in 3 years. Do not tell anyone, not one person. This is a secret between you and me. Emma nodded, very solemn. Then she raised her small right hand and stuck out her little finger. Alessandro looked at it for a moment. Then he hooked his own around hers. He had not made that gesture with anyone since Matteo was alive. That afternoon, just after 3, the door of the second-floor study opened without a knock. Alessandro looked up from the contract he was still failing to read, and Emma stepped inside with the cloth rabbit tucked under her left arm. She walked all the way up to the edge of his desk. She had to stand on the tips of her small shoes to see over the top of it. Then she lifted her right hand and slowly opened her fingers. Something small lay in the center of her palm. Alessandro did not move for a moment. Then he set down his pen and leaned forward. It was a button, round, roughly the diameter of a thumbnail, made of some heavy metal that caught the light, like polished brass. He could see the small loop shank on the underside, still holding a torn thread of dark fabric. The face of the button was flat, and something had been stamped into it, pressed deep into the metal. From the desk it looked like 2 thin bars crossed at an angle, with 3 faint letters beneath them. Emma set the button down on the wood in front of him. Then she raised her small hands and told him, in her wobbling, half-invented sign, what she had come to say. I saw it. Under the chair, where the doctor sat. She paused, thought, and tried again to be clearer. I went back at lunchtime. For my rabbit. She lifted the toy briefly to explain, then set it on the corner of the desk and continued. I saw the button under the chair. I took it. I brought it to you. Alessandro reached out and picked up the button between his thumb and forefinger. He turned it slowly under the pool of light thrown by the desk lamp. The image on the face sharpened. 2 small hammers, crossed at the heads. Below them, 3 letters stamped into the brass, worn slightly at the edges but still legible. C-R-D. He did not recognize the mark. But he knew, with the clean certainty a man develops after 20 years of watching what people wore into his house, that this was not a button from any doctor's vest. Victor's vest buttons were black horn. He had worn the same suit, or the twin of it, on every Friday for 3 years. Alessandro had watched him fasten and unfasten that middle button of the vest 150 times. Those buttons were dull. They did not catch the light. They did not have logos stamped into them. The button on his desk had come off something else, something heavier, something a man wore over his suit when he did not want the suit itself to be seen, a work coat, a jacket meant for a warehouse or a loading dock or a job that had nothing to do with medicine. The cold that had touched him in the corridor that morning came back and settled into the base of his spine and did not leave. He closed his fingers around the small brass disc. Emma watched him, still standing on her toes, still uncertain whether she had brought him something good or something that would make him angry. He looked up at her and gave her the smallest smile he was capable of. Good girl, he signed. She grinned, snatched up her rabbit, and skipped out of the room. He sat alone with the button pressed inside his fist for a very long time. That night, at 10:15, Alessandro sent for Marco Bellini and closed the door of the second-floor study behind him. Marco stepped inside without speaking. He had been the head of security in this house long enough to read the quality of a silence, and this one was different from the ones he had learned to work inside. He stood in the middle of the room and waited. Alessandro reached into the top drawer of the desk and took out 2 things. He set the small brass button on the wood between them. Then he took out a folded square of white handkerchief and unfolded it carefully. Inside was a glass sample vial. Half a teaspoon of pale amber liquid moved slowly against the walls of it when he set it down. Marco looked at the liquid, then at Alessandro. "The doctor left his case on the hall chair this morning," he said quietly, without being asked. "About 4 minutes. On his way to the powder room. I have it back in the case now. He will not know." Alessandro nodded once. He had already known that Marco would understand what he wanted before he asked for it. He wrote quickly on the whiteboard. "Send both to an independent laboratory in New Jersey. Not anyone who has ever worked with this family. Pay cash through an account that does not carry our name. No internal records. No one else is to know these exist." Marco read the board. He did not write anything down. He looked up. "Boss," he said, "who do you suspect?" Alessandro wiped the board clean with the edge of his hand. He wrote again, in the same careful block letters. "I suspect everyone in this house except 3 people." Marco read the sentence. He did not need to ask which 3. He was one of them. The other 2 lived in a small room in the staff quarters and shared a cloth rabbit between them. He picked up the vial and the button. He tucked one into the inside pocket of his jacket and the other into the small watch pocket of his trousers, so that no clink of glass would betray either. Then he nodded, once, and left the study without another word. 6 days later, the analysis of the liquid came back. Marco brought it into the second-floor study just after 9 at night, in a thin brown envelope with no return address. He set it on the desk and stepped back to the door. Alessandro slid a single sheet of paper out and read it under the lamp. The active compound in the amber bottle was not what the printed label described. It was not an anti-inflammatory of any kind. It was a nerve irritant derivative, safe enough in short courses on healthy tissue, but continuous administration into an already damaged inner ear, over a period of years, would slowly destroy whatever functioning nerve cells remained in the canal. The lab noted, in the flat neutral way that laboratories note such things, that the pattern of use appeared inconsistent with any legitimate therapeutic purpose. Alessandro read the sheet twice, then he set it down on the desk and did not move. It took him a long time to breathe out. 3 years, 52 Fridays a year, 3 drops each Friday, 468 drops. The button, Marco told him quietly from the doorway, was still out. He had sent it to a different house. That report was not back yet. Alessandro nodded without looking up. At 2 o'clock on the following Tuesday morning, a black car left the DeLuca estate through the north service gate with its headlights off until it passed the line of trees. Marco drove. There was no escort. Alessandro's phone remained on the desk in the second-floor study, powered on, left exactly where anyone in the house would expect it to be. He sat in the back seat with the blue folder resting on his knee. It was the original file Victor Hale had built for him 3 years earlier. Marco had lifted it from the doctor's case the week before and returned it to the same spot before 6 the next morning. Victor did not know it had ever left. The imaging facility took up the 3rd floor of an office building in Midtown, one of the quiet places that stayed open all night for people who did not want to share a waiting room with anyone else. Marco had called at 11 the previous night and paid cash for the entire shift. The technician on duty, a man of about 40 in green scrubs, did not ask for a name. He did not ask for insurance. He handed over a single form to be signed and pointed toward the scanning room. The scan took 18 minutes. When Alessandro came out, the technician was leaning over the control console. He scrolled down, stopped, scrolled back up, stopped again. He remained perfectly still for about 10 seconds. Then he turned the monitor around. Against the gray background of the cross-section, directly behind the left eardrum, sat a bright white spot. It was about 4 millimeters long. It had edges. Everything else on the screen was made of soft curves, fading from pale gray into darker gray, and finally into black. But this was straight on one side and beveled on the other, so brilliantly white that it blurred the tissue around it. It was not bone. It was not calcified scar. The technician wrote foreign body, metallic density on the small yellow note beside the monitor and did not say a word. On Wednesday morning, Alessandro sat in a quiet office on the 6th floor of a Manhattan medical building, across the desk from Dr. Helen Bianchi. She was 55, with steel gray hair cut close to her head, and she had been operating on ears in this city for close to 30 years. Marco waited on the couch by the door. She studied the scan for 4 minutes. She enlarged it twice. Then she removed her glasses and looked directly at Alessandro. She spoke to him, not to Marco. She kept her face turned toward him so he could read her lips, but she did not slow her mouth or open it too wide. "This is a mechanical injury," she said. "The metal fragment is lodged behind your eardrum. It has broken the ossicular chain on the left side. Your auditory nerve is not dead. This can be repaired surgically." Alessandro reached for the notepad on her desk and wrote one word. "Certain?" Bianchi pulled the blue folder toward herself and turned through it slowly. She stopped at 4 separate conclusions, each signed by a different specialist in a different city over the course of 11 months. Each rested on the same original set of images. No one had ordered a new scan. Then she found 3 separate orders for magnetic resonance imaging, spread across the 3 years of the file. All 3 carried the same cancellation stamp. At the bottom of every cancellation, in careful slanted handwriting, was the same signature: Julian Victor Hale. Dr. Bianchi had an operating room available on Monday morning, 48 hours away. Her conditions were plain: no admission under his name, no insurance, no notification to his family physician. No one in his household could know where he was. She wrote each condition down on the order sheet in her careful hand, and after each one she looked up at him and waited for him to nod before she wrote the next. He agreed to all of them. He returned to the estate on Saturday afternoon. He went straight to the second-floor study and asked Marco to bring Sophia and Emma up. They stepped in together, mother and daughter, and Marco closed the door behind them. Alessandro walked around the desk and, for the second time in a week, lowered himself onto one knee in front of Emma. Sophia stood a pace behind her, her hands folded tightly in front of her waist, saying nothing. He signed slowly. He wrote each phrase on the small whiteboard as he went, so that Sophia could read along. "I am going away for a few days. This is a secret between me and you and your mother. No one else can know. Can you promise me?" Emma's small face went as solemn as he had ever seen it. She nodded. Then she raised her right hand and held out her little finger. He hooked his own around hers. It was the second time. He rose and turned to Sophia. He spoke in his own voice, quietly, the way he almost never did anymore. "If Miss Rossi asks," he said, "I have gone to Chicago to meet a dock owner. 4 days. I did not tell you where. You do not know when I return." Sophia nodded once. She did not ask what he was doing. She did not ask why. She only said, softly, "Yes, sir," and led Emma out. Sunday night, at 11:30, the black car left the estate again through the north service gate. The headlights stayed off until the long curve of the drive had passed the hedgerow. Marco drove. Alessandro sat in the back with a small overnight bag on the seat beside him. Monday morning at 7:15, the doors of the operating room on the 8th floor of a private surgical center closed. Marco sat down in the 3rd chair from the end of the hallway. He had a paper cup of coffee in one hand. It went cold in the first hour. By the second, he set it on the floor. There were 14 tiles between his feet and the operating room doors, and he counted them more times than he cared to admit. The surgery lasted 5 hours. At 12:20, the doors opened, and Dr. Bianchi stepped out. She pulled the mask down beneath her chin. "The ossicular chain was broken in 2 places on the left side," she said. "We reconstructed it." Marco stood. The foreign body was removed intact, no fracture. He waited. "For the next 48 hours. No one can promise you anything. Do not ask me for a number." She reached into the pocket of her surgical coat and drew out a small clear plastic sample tube. It had a printed label and a black screw cap. She held it out. Marco took it in his palm. Inside, sitting quietly against the bottom, was a dark fragment of metal about 4 millimeters long, straight along one edge, beveled along the other. He held it for a very long time before he closed his fingers around the tube. The recovery room on the 4th floor was dark, with only a small light glowing in the corner behind the equipment cart. Alessandro De Luca woke at 4:12 in the morning. He knew the time, because the digital clock built into the monitor beside his bed showed it in red numerals. Its glow was the first thing his eyes found when they opened. For 3 years, the first thing he had done every time he woke had been to search for something to look at, because there was nothing else to receive. This time, he lay still. Something was happening. He did not know what it was. It did not hurt. It was not a sensation on his skin or under it. It was inside his head, and it would not stop. Something steady, but not even. Many rhythms layered over one another. Thick, then thin, then thick again. His first instinct was to think of a complication. Something inside his head had broken further, something the surgeon had not warned him about. He reached toward the nurse call button clipped to the bed rail. His fingertips touched the cord. Then they stopped, because he had just understood, in the small, clean way a man understands one thing at a time, that the sound was not inside his head. It was coming from outside. He turned his head slowly to the left. He looked past the pale rail, past the plastic edge of the monitor, and through the window beside the bed. It was dark outside. Water was sliding down the glass in one trail after another. When the wind rose, the trails multiplied and struck the pane in a soft pattering rush. When the wind fell, They thinned out and moved slower and softer, each drop clear on its own. The rhythm in his head matched them exactly. It took him nearly a full minute to understand. It was raining. His right hand closed around the metal bed rail. It tightened until his knuckles turned white, and it stayed that way, unmoving, while the rest of his body lay perfectly still. He did not press the call button. He did not call anyone. He lay there and listened for 7 minutes. He heard the water striking the window when the wind rose, growing sparse when the wind faded, gathering again. He heard a steadier, deeper sound farther away, and it took him a while longer to connect it to the drain pipe running along the outside edge of the window. He heard the monitor beside his bed sound one soft beat at a time, and he realized it was matching the rhythm pounding inside his chest. 3 years earlier, he had lain in a room exactly like this one with the same kind of machine, and he had never known it made a sound. Someone had sat beside his bed for 3 days after the explosion. He had never heard them. 200 people had opened their mouths at once at Mateo's funeral. He had stood at the front and not heard a single word. He lay still. His right hand stayed locked around the rail. At the 8th minute, the door opened. Light from the hallway spilled across the floor in one long strip. A voice entered the room. Dr. Bianchi asked the night nurse whether the 4 o'clock observation had been recorded. Alessandro closed his eyes. He kept his breathing perfectly even. He did not move. In the 7 minutes before that door opened, he had made his decision. He would keep this secret. Whoever had lied to him for 3 years would have to reveal themselves. 4 days later, he came home. The story that ran through the estate was the one he and Marco had chosen. The boss had been in Chicago 4 days, meeting a dock owner. The bandage on his left ear was the result of a small cosmetic procedure. No one was to ask about it. No one did. Dr. Bianchi was to check him at her private clinic every 7 days. She would call it a follow-up on a minor sinus repair if anyone in the office asked. No one there asked either. The first Friday after he came home, Dr. Hale arrived at 7 o'clock in the morning with his black leather case, exactly the way he had arrived on every Friday for 3 years. He walked into the small study, set the case on the low table, and clicked the brass locks open. He looked up. His eyes went to the white bandage taped along the side of Alessandro's head. They stayed there a moment longer than they should have. Alessandro caught it out of the corner of his eye and did not move a single muscle in his face. Victor took out the blood pressure cuff. He wrapped it around Alessandro's left arm and pumped it up. He wrote the reading into the blue file in his careful, slanted hand. Then he unscrewed the amber bottle. He did not tilt Alessandro's head to the left this time. He could not. He tilted it to the right instead, exposed the right ear, and released 3 drops into that canal. Alessandro closed his eyes the way he had closed them on every Friday for 3 years, but this time he felt the cold liquid slide into the ear with perfect clarity. He felt the exact instant each of the 3 drops landed. He felt his own pulse behind the eardrum. He did nothing about any of it. Victor closed the amber bottle, wrote another line in the file, snapped the case shut, and left. That evening, just before 10, Marco came into the second-floor study with a folded sheet of paper in his hand. "Boss," he said. He hesitated in a way that was not like him. "I just received the maintenance report for the camera system. The technician said the storage drives are almost full. He asked whether he should delete anything old." Alessandro looked up. Marco took a breath. "I only just learned that this system records sound too. Ever since it was installed 5 years ago, all 14 cameras in the house have had microphones. No one has ever disabled them." He paused. "No one has deleted a single hour in 3 years. The technician said most other houses erase their recordings automatically after 30 days. But here that setting was never turned on. He said it was because the owner of the house was deaf. Everyone who touched the system assumed there was no reason to save the audio, so no one bothered to configure it." Alessandro sat very still. He reached for the whiteboard on the desk. He wrote 1 line and turned it around. "Do not delete anything. Do not tell anyone. Buy more storage." Marco read it, nodded, and carried the board toward the door. He stopped at the threshold. He did not turn around. "Boss," he said quietly, "should I keep writing on the board?" Alessandro did not answer. Marco waited 2 seconds. Then he nodded, to himself this time, and stepped out, and he kept writing on the board every day that came after. 3 weeks passed inside the estate, and from the outside nothing had changed. Alessandro continued to watch mouths. He continued to accept the small whiteboard from Marco each morning. He continued to let people slow their voices down and stretch their words the way they had done for 3 years. He nodded when they nodded. He signed his name at the bottom of documents someone else had already read to no one. He walked through his own house the way he had walked through it for 1,000 days, and everyone who worked inside it went on treating him exactly as they always had. But inside those 3 weeks, Alessandro De Luca heard more than he had heard in the 3 years before them combined. He heard that people lowered their voices the instant they stepped through the doorway of his study. All of them, even the ones he paid the most. It was a reflex none of them realized they had. He heard that when he rose from the dining table and walked out, the conversation behind his back did not stop. It only changed pitch. He heard that certain doors closed a little faster after he passed, and that certain phones came out of pockets a little sooner. One evening, near 9:30, he was crossing the second-floor landing on his way to the study when he stopped without meaning to. At the foot of the wide staircase, Vivian Rossi was on the phone. Her voice was high and quick and clipped. It moved with the sharpness of a woman who did not have time to be gentle. It was nothing at all like the slow, wide-lipped voice she used whenever she opened her mouth in front of him. He had never heard the true one before. He stood very still with his hand on the railing and listened. 6 weeks after the wedding it will all be finished, she said. Papa, don't touch anything before then. He doesn't know. He can't know. She said goodbye. She dropped the phone into the small silk purse at her wrist. She started up the stairs. He was halfway across the landing by the time she saw him, moving as though he had been coming from the study, not toward it. She smiled at once and raised one hand and made the small sign she had learned somewhere, the only sign she had ever bothered to memorize. Going to bed first. He nodded. He let her pass. She kissed her fingertips and touched them once to his shoulder as she went by, and her scent, jasmine and something colder, remained on his sleeve after she was gone. 3 days later, waiting for the car at the west entrance, he heard 2 of his own security men talking around the corner of the house, behind the low box hedge that hid the side path. They did not know he was on the other side of it. The boss looks better lately, one said. Doesn't matter, said the other. This place will have a new owner by next year anyway. Alessandro did not move a muscle in his face. He heard the car pull up on the gravel a moment later. He stepped out from behind the hedge and got in without a word. He said nothing to Marco during the drive. He simply committed the second voice to memory. The materials analysis on the 4mm fragment arrived from the laboratory in New Jersey on a Thursday afternoon. Marco brought it into the second-floor study in a plain brown envelope with no return address and set it on the desk. It was 14 pages long. Most of the pages were tables of alloy composition, microscopic photographs, and technical specifications Alessandro did not need to understand. The conclusion was on the second page. It consisted of 3 lines. The specimen was not a piece of random debris. Its surface bore signs of precision machining, with one edge cut straight by a factory die and the other beveled at a standard angle. The fragment was part of the casing of a commercial blasting cap used in structural demolition. Alessandro read the 3 lines twice, then turned to page 4. Under 50 times magnification, a sequence of 7 characters had been stamped into the metal along the beveled edge. Half of them were partly obscured by heat scoring, but every one of them was still legible. The laboratory noted, in the flat neutral language of such reports, that it was a production lot number, and that this type of blasting cap was required under federal law to carry its lot number on every casing component. Records of every shipment of such caps manufactured or distributed in the United States were required to be filed with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Every hand that had held that lot had been required to sign for it. Marco was already ahead of him. He had hired a private investigative firm in Philadelphia that the De Luca family had never used before. He had paid through an account bearing no family name and had given the firm one task and no context: trace this lot number backward. 9 days later, on a Saturday evening, the report came back. 31 pages. The lot of blasting caps bearing that number had been manufactured at a plant in Pennsylvania. It had been distributed to 3 end users. A quarry in Vermont had received the largest share. An infrastructure contractor in upstate New York had received a smaller allocation, and 30% of the lot had gone to a company called Cedar Ridge Demolition and Grading, registered at an address in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Cedar Ridge had been incorporated 9 years earlier. Its legal representative was a name no one at the De Luca estate had ever heard. Alessandro turned to page 22. Above that legal representative's name was a list of shareholders. The controlling interest was held by a limited liability company registered in Delaware. That Delaware company held stakes in 4 other businesses across New York State. 2 of those 4 were freight and warehousing operations. Alessandro knew very well. He had sat across the negotiating table from both of them. They belonged to the Rossi family. Alessandro turned back to the front of the report. On the cover page, next to the company name, The firm had reproduced the Cedar Ridge logo in small, clean black ink, 2 crossed hammers, 3 letters below them, C, R, D. He opened the top drawer of the desk. He took out the small brass button Emma had placed in his palm 11 days before. He set it on the wood in front of him. He took the clear plastic sample tube containing the 4mm fragment out of the drawer beside it, and he set that down too. He placed the 2 objects side by side, so close that they almost touched. For 3 years, the people who had ordered the bomb that killed his younger brother had been the family that was about to become his in-laws. At 1 a.m, in the second-floor study, long after every light in the estate had been turned off, Alessandro opened the bottom drawer on the left side of his desk and took out an old phone. Its battery had died 3 years earlier, and he had kept it there ever since. The charging cord lay coiled beside it, held together with a rubber band that had begun to crack. He plugged the cord into the wall. He plugged the other end into the phone. He set it on the desk under the pool of light and waited. 4 minutes later, the screen came on. He entered his old passcode. It still worked. There were 19 voicemails in his inbox. He did not open the first 18. He scrolled down to the last one, the only one whose exact time he remembered. It had been left at 8:54 on that evening, 26 minutes before the front room of a small restaurant in Little Italy had come apart. In 3 years, he had opened this message 3 times. The first time had been in the second week of the hospital stay, when he still believed his hearing would come back. The second had been 6 months later. The third had been at 1 a.m. on the first anniversary of Matteo's death, when he had pressed the phone against his right ear and sat perfectly still until the screen had gone dark on its own. He had never heard a single word. This time he set the phone flat on the desk. He turned on the speaker. He pressed play. Matteo's voice filled the room. "Dom, I think I was badly wrong. What happened last month wasn't done by an outsider." There was a voice speaking behind him, and the soft slam of a car door. "I got hold of something this afternoon that proves it. I can't say it over the phone. Come to the place. I'll show you. Go ahead and order. I'll be there in 10 minutes. A short laugh. "And don't order the fish this time. You always order it. Every time you complain about it." The message ended. Alessandro touched the screen and played it again. He listened a second time. He listened a third. By the fourth, he was no longer listening to the words but to everything else. The voices in the background, the car door, the distant horn somewhere at the far end of that street. On the 7th, he stopped at 19 seconds and rewound 3 times to hear the laugh again. It was brief. There was nothing remarkable about it. It was the laugh of a man of 32, who believed that in 10 minutes he would sit down to dinner with his older brother, and that after that dinner there would be thousands more. He listened for the 8th time, then the 9th, then the 10th. On the 11th, he did not rewind. He let the message play all the way through until the automated voice recited the date and the time and offered him the option to delete it. And he let the call disconnect on its own. His 2 hands rested on the desk on either side of the phone. They did not move. Near 3 a.m, the study door opened a crack. Emma stood in the hallway, holding her rabbit. She had woken and passed the door and seen the strip of light. She did not knock. She did not ask. She set a small glass of water on the low cabinet beside the door. Then she sat down on the wooden floor, drew her knees up, and stayed there. She did not say a single word for the rest of that night. Alessandro did not turn around. He knew she was there. At 5:15, the eastern light crept across the floor and reached the middle of the room. She got up, took the glass of water that had gone cold, and went downstairs to the kitchen. The following Tuesday morning, Vivian Rossi began to suspect. Her suspicion began with something very small. She walked into the breakfast room from behind Alessandro, and he set his coffee cup down on its saucer half a second before she moved into his line of sight. A deaf man had no reason to set his cup down at that exact moment. She noted it. She sat down across from him. She spoke to him in the slow, wide-mouthed voice she had used for 3 years. She did not mention what she had seen. 3 days later, she tested him. Alessandro was standing at the tall window of the main sitting room with his back to her. He was watching something in the garden, or nothing. She picked up the brass paperweight from the low shelf, held it beside her hip, and let it fall. It struck the hardwood floor. It bounced twice. Alessandro did not turn. He did not flinch. He did not tilt his head toward the sound. He kept his shoulders in exactly the same line for 4 full seconds. Then, slowly, he turned, saw the paperweight lying on the floor near her feet, and raised one eyebrow with the expression of a man who could not understand how it had gotten there. He walked over, bent down, picked it up, and set it back on the shelf. Vivian stood there smiling. She raised one hand and made the small, imprecise motion for my hand slipped. She said nothing else. She walked out of the room. But she knew. She did not go looking for Alessandro. She went looking for the weakest link. That Friday afternoon, Alessandro and Marco left the estate to meet the family lawyer in Manhattan. They were not expected back until after dark. At 4 o'clock, Vivian summoned the director of the DeLuca Family Asset Management Office to the small parlor on the ground floor. She asked him for the employment contract of one Sophia Carter. He brought it, 3 pages. She read all 3, including the fine print. She stopped at the final clause. The homeowner reserved the right to terminate the arrangement at any time with written notice, effective immediately. In 6 weeks, Vivian would be the homeowner. Her name had been on the internal expenditure approval list for a full year already. The lawyer who drafted the marriage contract had written that in himself. She wrote out the termination notice in 4 minutes. She signed it. She slid it back across the desk. The director looked at the sheet a moment longer than a man normally looks at a piece of paper he has been handed. He picked it up. He left. At 5:15, 2 members of the household security team knocked on the door of the last small room in the staff corridor. They did not raise their voices. They handed Sophia the notice through the crack of the door. She read it once. She did not ask them any questions. She simply turned back into the room, took the small cloth bag Marco had given her some weeks earlier, and packed 3 sets of clothes for herself and 3 for Emma. When she stepped out into the corridor with the bag in her hand and Emma at her side, Vivian was standing at the top of the staircase. Vivian looked down at the 2 of them. Her voice was soft and almost kind. "Take her back where she belongs," she said. The 2 men led Sophia and Emma toward the service door. The black SUV carrying Sophia and Emma pulled out through the side gate of the estate and turned west. It crossed the Queens Midtown Tunnel and dropped onto Interstate 278. Neither of the 2 men in the front seat spoke. Sophia sat in the back with Emma pressed against her side, one arm holding the small cloth bag on her lap, the other around her daughter. 40 minutes passed without a word. Just before they reached the exit, the man in the front passenger seat turned in his seat and told Sophia to hand over her phone. She said quietly that she did not have one. He looked at her for a moment, then turned back around. He did not ask again. The SUV rolled through the wide access lanes of the container yards at Port Newark at 7 o'clock in the evening. High sodium lights washed the top of the fencing in orange. It stopped along the outside of Yard 4, next to a gate that was chained but not padlocked. An abandoned bus shelter stood about 200 meters down the road, alone under the last standing lamp. The driver unlocked the rear doors. Sophia stepped out, the bag in one hand and Emma in the other. Emma clutched her rabbit against her chest. The SUV made a slow 3-point turn on the empty asphalt, and its taillights disappeared around the curve. On the drive, Emma had remembered something Alessandro had told her the week before. If you see something strange, look at everything. She had looked. She had seen a small patch on the shoulder of the driver's work coat, a canvas jacket that did not match the black suits the men usually wore, 2 thin crossed hammers, 3 letters beneath them, C-R-D. The same mark, exactly, as the button she had placed on Alessandro's desk 6 weeks earlier. Sophia did not know. She sat down on the bus shelter bench, drew Emma onto her lap, and wrapped both arms around her. At the same moment, at 7:20 on the estate driveway, Alessandro DeLuca stepped out of his own car. He walked straight past the main foyer, down the connecting corridor to the staff quarters, and along the hallway to the last door. The room was empty. The bed had been flattened. Every drawer of the small chest stood open. Behind him, Vivian came down the wide staircase at an unhurried pace. She spoke in her normal voice, the sharp-clipped one she had never before used within the walls of that house. Her contract was no longer appropriate, she said. "I signed the termination this morning." Alessandro did not turn around. He asked, quietly, in his own voice, for the first time in 3 years, "Which car did they take?" Vivian froze on the 3rd step from the bottom. She had just spoken from behind his back. He had not been able to read her lips. He had not been able to see her at all. And he had answered. He turned. He faced her. Her face had gone the color of paper. He spoke again, evenly, without raising his voice, and cold enough that the words seemed to lower the air of the corridor by several degrees. "If anything happens to that child," he said, "your entire family will pay for it." Behind him, Marco was already at the main door, with the keys of a second vehicle and 6 men waiting on the drive. Alessandro walked past Vivian without looking at her again. The Cedar Ridge warehouse sat in the western industrial belt of Port Newark, a low steel building with a single sodium light burning above the roll-up door. Alessandro's second car reached it at 8:15 in the evening. Marco split 6 men and sent them in from 2 directions. Inside, under a single row of overhead lamps, Dr. Victor Hale was holding Sophia in front of him, with a small folding knife pressed against the side of her neck. Emma stood 2 steps away from her mother, sobbing without sound. Both small fists closed around the ear of the rabbit. Alessandro stepped in alone through the main door. Victor gave a dry, tired laugh. "You arrived earlier than I expected," he said. "But that's fine. It's enough for you to watch." Emma saw something shift behind Alessandro. A shadow moved out from behind a tall pallet rack near the loading bay. She raised her 2 small hands and made the only sign she had learned that week from her mother. "Someone behind you." Alessandro understood the moment his eyes touched hers. He dropped into a crouch. Marco fired once from the side aisle. The man behind the rack hit the concrete before his own weapon cleared his coat. 40 seconds later, Alessandro's men had the rest of the room. Victor let the knife fall from his hand and raised both palms slowly into the light. Sophia lunged forward and pulled Emma into her arms and sobbed into her hair without a single sound. 4 days later, the private dining room on the 7th floor of a club on the Upper East Side held 6 men around a long walnut table and a black speakerphone connected to a 7th in Florida. Salvatore Rossi presented his proposal for a joint governing board with the absolute confidence of a man who had already counted the votes. He leaned toward the man beside him and said, half under his breath, half smiling, "He can't even hear what we're saying." Alessandro raised his head. He spoke in his own voice, quietly and cleanly, the way he had not spoken inside that room in 3 years. "I hear you perfectly clearly, Mr. Rossi." Every face at the table went still. He placed each item on the walnut wood one at a time. The clear plastic sample tube with the 4mm fragment, the 31-page report tracing the Cedar Ridge lot number back to the Rossi Holding Company, the laboratory analysis of the amber bottle, a small recorder, played once, on which Dr. Hale confessed to who had paid him and when, and a small flash drive containing thousands of hours of audio from 14 cameras inside the DeLuca estate, including several evenings on which Vivian Rossi had discussed, at length, with her father, exactly what the marriage was intended to accomplish. The voice from Florida spoke through the speaker after 12 seconds of silence. "I withdraw from this proposal." Within 24 hours, the 3 other families had withdrawn from every open agreement with the Rossis. The empire that Salvatore had spent 40 years building came apart without a single shot being fired. Vivian left the estate the next morning. She met Emma in the front hallway on her way to the car. She stopped and looked at the child for a long moment. "What did you do?" she asked. "To make him trust you like that?" Emma thought about it. She was 4 years old, and she answered the question the way a 4-year-old answers a question. "I told him what I saw," she said. "You never did." Vivian did not reply. She pulled her suitcase toward the door and did not turn around. The following Saturday morning, Emma ran into Alessandro's study and stopped at the edge of the desk. "Can you hear me?" she asked. He looked at her for a long time. 3 years ago, he had believed that if he ever heard again, the first voice he wanted to hear would be Matteo's. He could not have that, but life had given him another sound instead. "Yes," he said. "I hear you perfectly." Emma smiled. She held up a new crayon drawing, a tall man and a small girl standing side by side at the edge of a blue rectangle of water, a yellow sun above them both. This story leaves us with something quiet worth carrying home. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stop, lower themselves to a child's eyes, and listen to what that child has seen. In the world of grown men, we too often step past children because we assume they cannot understand, and yet, again and again, it is the eyes of a small child that see the truth every adult eye in the room has missed. Real power is not the ability to make others fear you. Real power is having someone willing to learn your language just so they can speak with you. Has there ever been someone in your life who listened to you at the exact moment you needed it most? Or have you ever been the one who stopped for a stranger and truly listened? Please share your feelings in the comments below. We would love to hear the thoughts that come from deep in your heart. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share this video so that we can keep bringing you meaningful stories every day. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day to come. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next video.